segment. Mark tweets, "Dear Laura, thank you for talking about Alfie Evans. An Italian state flight with doctors and medical personnel has been waiting for days in Liverpool to take Alfie to the Children's Hospital in Rome. God bless you all for trying to help. Peace be with you." It's heartbreaking. Remember to tweet me at Ingram Angle. We can only pray at this point and hope this never happens in this country. It's all the time we have left. Shannon Bream is up next.
All right, we'll have more on the case as well. Thank you very much, Laura. Well, three major breaking stories here tonight. Bill Cosby found guilty on 3 counts of sexual assault. Hear from an attorney representing a number of Cosby's accusers right here. Plus, explosive new text messages between 2 anti-Trump FBI officials are revealed, with a focus on fired FBI Director James Comey. Bret Baier will be here with reaction and highlights from his blockbuster interview tonight. And as baby Alfie clings to life, we have a stunning look at why the UK health system may be blocking his parents from taking him elsewhere for care. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin with phenomenal footage from the demilitarized zone separating the Koreas, where the 2 leaders make history as they shake hands. The meeting comes on the heels of newly confirmed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's historic meeting with the North Korean strongman Kim Jong-un just weeks ago. Kim reportedly telling the South Korean president that he doesn't want to repeat the past, while the White House says it is hopeful that the talks will achieve progress towards peace ahead of a potential summit with President Trump. Team coverage tonight. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry has all the details from the White House, and Senior Foreign Affairs Correspondent Greg Palkot is live with us from Seoul. That's where we begin tonight. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Shannon. A new history starts now. Those are the hopeful words coming from Kim Jong-un on this very historic morning here in South Korea. For the first time since the Korean War, a North Korean leader crossed into South Korea, that along the DMZ. Kim Jong-un shaking the hands of his host, South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Confident, almost playful. I've seen this young leader a few times, and I've never seen him this assured. And then on to review a traditional Korean honor guard in this carefully staged ceremony. The North Korean leader looked a bit more stern. Some commentators said that he made a point of not looking into the eyes of the South Korean military present. And then a message in the guest book of the so-called Peace House in this joint security area. Writing with his own pen, he said further, he talked about an age of peace. And then, at a vast oval conference table where the first of 2 sessions for today began, North and South leaders face to face, sitting across from each other. South Korean government insiders tell me that while much has been agreed on today about inter-Korean relations, there is still work to be done to see how far Kim is willing to go in his so-called commitment to denuclearization. After the last year of missiles and nukes coming from the north, this, of course, is a big concern of the United States. The White House going on to say that it is looking forward to more discussions leading up to their own summit with Kim Jong-un and President Trump. Shannon, there is another major session this afternoon between the 2 leaders of North and South Korea. There'll be a reception, some ceremonies, and then a final statement should be coming from these 2 leaders. And then we should see if there's any substance from this very, very important day. Back to you.
Greg Palkot for us in Seoul. Thank you very much. Well, North Korea front and center on a day of key confirmations for the president. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry is here with the latest on Today in Washington.
Shannon, great to see you. Heard President Trump's deep frustration with Democratic obstructionism during his exclusive interview this morning with Fox and Friends. There's such a backlog on his nominees that there have been studies of this, that it would take 9 years to get all of his nominees confirmed, longer, obviously, than he'd actually be in office, even if he serves 2 terms. So he's pushing to get Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to actually force senators to work weekends sometimes if they have to in order to get this back on track. And today, there were actually 2 victories for the president. The CIA Director Mike Pompeo sworn in as Secretary of State by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. You see him there after winning Senate confirmation, but only by a margin of 57-42. Much smaller than the major bipartisan support Hillary Clinton and John Kerry got in the last administration. But the White House is trying to turn the page on that quickly by immediately noting something that Greg Greg just noted, the prominent role in talks with North Korea that Pompeo has been playing. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders tweeting the first photos we've seen of Pompeo meeting secretly with dictator Kim Jong-un over Easter weekend. Sanders declaring, quote, great to have Secretary Pompeo confirmed he will do an excellent job helping at POTUS lead our efforts to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. Another win for the president, as Rick Grenell also confirmed, U.S. ambassador to Germany. After months of delays, Democrats finally gave in because their obstructionism would have been magnified if Grenell was still not confirmed by tomorrow when German Chancellor Angela Merkel arrives at the White House. Important meetings, not just on Iran, but of course North Korea as well. A big loss, though, for the president. Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson pulled out of consideration for Secretary of Veterans Affairs amid all kinds of anonymous allegations. He put out a statement declaring he would not dignify the baseless charges with any more comment. The president unloaded on Democrats who forced out Jackson as he signed autographs for the children of reporters who came to the White House for Take Your Kid to Work Day. Watch.
He's a great man, and he got treated very, very unfairly. He got treated really unfairly, and he's a hell of a man.
The president is what caused this problem by not properly vetting, by making these decisions on the fly, by making sure they don't count.
Now, Schumer is right that the White House seemed to be caught off guard by some of these allegations, but top aides to the president tell me tonight they went through a series of performance reports and reviews for Jackson as White House doctor, and they were glowing reports from then-President Barack Obama. Administration officials believe the real story is that Democrats were running down someone that they call a good man, Shannon.
All right, the other big development today, it was Take Your Child to Work Day.
Yeah, it's pretty fun because my daughter Mila is only 13. I know that she's kind of interested in journalism. She keeps a journal and all of that. You see her there. We're in the Rose Garden. But I had no idea that she was going to sort of just jump into this. She got a chance to meet President Trump along with other kids of journalists. And she did what kids do today. She turned on that smartphone and started taking video in the Oval Office when I was not actually there. Watch.
Check it out.
I think there's some sound.
Well, she was certainly up close with the president.
Yeah, so the president was talking, but now watch this, because he comes out of the Oval Office and starts talking to all these kids of journalists. You know, he's always talking about the fake news media and all of that. And so what I think is interesting is that he was saying, oh, you know, your parents are so tough on me, but, you know, you guys seem really nice. You don't see this sort of behind-the-scenes side of the president there, you know, sort of hugging people, and, you know, you see sort of the rough and tough president. So she got a little nice behind-the-scenes view, if you will.
She absolutely did. And you know what else today, Mike Emanuel's son, Savas, actually got to ask Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader, a question. So you guys, it's in the genes of these kids.
Fun.
You're passing along
a whole new
your
generation
talents.
will be out of jobs pretty soon.
I know, with the iPhone, they don't need us anymore.
Good to see you, Shannon.
Great to see you, too.
Thanks.
All right, a note now on Secretary Pompeo. Pro-life groups are calling his confirmation as Secretary of State a victory. The president of the Susan B. Anthony list says he is strongly pro-life and committed to upholding the dignity of every human being as America's top diplomat. Planned Parenthood, not so much, apologizing to the world for what they call the confirmation of an anti-woman, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-Muslim Secretary of State. Well, this is a Fox News alert. The verdict is in for Bill Cosby, guilty on all counts. The comedic legend, once known as America's Dad, was accused in 2014 of sexual assault. It wound up being dozens of women coming forward. Brian Yanis joins us live from Norristown, Pennsylvania, where this trial concluded today with a verdict. He's got more details. Brian.
Good evening, Shannon. Guilty, guilty, guilty. That was the verdict after 14 hours of deliberation from this jury made up of 7 men and 5 women. The comic legend, the 80-year-old comic legend known for playing on Bill Cosby, is now a convicted felon, accused and charged now of sexually assaulting Andrea Constand at his home back in 2004. He left the court with a smile on his face as though he was acquitted. He put his hand up in the air as the crowds were going around, and he ran back into his car. He is now on house arrest, released on $1 million bail. The judge taking away his passport, though, to make sure he does not flee. Now, big moment happened inside. Cosby was stoic when the verdict was read. That's what we understand happened inside that courtroom. But there was a big moment where he lashed out when the DA asked the judge to revoke his bail, citing that Cosby had a private plane and could flee, so he thought that he should remain in jail or be put in jail immediately. Well, Cosby said, quote, "He doesn't have a plane, you a-hole." I'm sick of him, he yelled at the DA. And the DA said today that is the real Bill Cosby, not the actor.
We have shown from our record that money and power, or who you are, will not stop us from a criminal investigation or prosecuting a case. And what was revealed through this investigation was a man who had spent decades preying on women that he drugged and sexually assaulted.
Andrea Constand, back in 2004, said that Cosby gave her 3 blue pills and sexually assaulted her. Cosby said that this relationship was consensual, that they did have a sexual relationship, but it was consensual. The jury in this case obviously believing Andrea Constand. This was a retrial. She went through this last summer, and it was a hung jury after 52 hours of deliberation. The big thing in this case, the 5 women that were allowed to testify that had accused Bill Cosby of the same thing back in the 80s, that allowed the prosecution to really lay out a pattern of behavior that probably proved to be pivotal. Cosby's lawyer said, well, they're going to appeal. And Shannon, so that's Tom Mesereau is his defense attorney. He represented Michael Jackson successfully. He said that they will fight back and appeal this case. Right now, we're awaiting the sentencing hearing, when that will happen. But again, Bill Cosby, the comic legend, now a convicted felon, and could likely die in prison, up to 30 years in prison, if depending on this sentencing. Shannon.
All right, Brian, great coverage today as this played out. Thank you very much. All right, let's bring in an attorney who's very familiar with the details of these allegations against Cosby. Joe Camerata represents 7 women who have sued Bill Cosby for defamation in federal court. He is a trial attorney and joins us live. Great to have you with us, Joe.
Thank you.
Were you surprised at all by this verdict today? Because there was one unsuccessful trial already. This was bite 2 at the apple.
No, I sat through most of the evidence, and the evidence was overwhelming that Mr. Cosby had engaged in a pattern and practice of mentoring and then abusing young women for his own personal gratification, and the jury saw that and did the right thing, which was to convict Bill Cosby.
It doesn't always happen in trials, but in this one, 5 of his other accusers who were not a party to this case were allowed to take the stand and testify. What kind of difference do you think that made to the jury?
A significant difference, because it wasn't just Andrea Constand and her telling of the story that I was mentored, and then I was given a drug, and then I was abused. We had other women who came in and talked about their similar stories about him, Bill Cosby, ingratiating himself with the parents or grandparents, mentoring these young women, and then giving them drugs or alcohol and then abusing them. So there was a common scheme that he employed in order for his own personal gratification, and the jury understood that. And they said, we're not going to tolerate this in our society. Okay, so let's go now to a little bit of reaction from his defense team. Here is Cosby's attorney.
We are very disappointed by the verdict. We don't think Mr. Cosby's guilty of anything, and the fight is not over. Thank you. Are you going to appeal, sir? Yes. Yes. Yes, very strongly.
So they're going to appeal. In the meantime, he's out free on bail. My understanding is the prosecutors asked for him to be jailed right away, but we got to wait sentencing in the next few days or so, is my understanding, and that he is free at this point. It was one of the first questions one of my non-lawyer friends asked me today, saying, as a lawyer, can you explain this to me? Why is he allowed to remain free in the meantime?
Well, the judge takes into certain factors into consideration. Is he a flight risk? They determined that he's going to be under, if you would, house arrest. He's going to put on a monitoring bracelet or what have you, so they know where his whereabouts are. But to listen to the defense team's reaction, we don't believe he's guilty. Well, unfortunately for them, they don't get to decide. The jury, the society, understood, they heard the evidence, and they knew that he was guilty, resoundingly convicted Bill Cosby of these heinous crimes.
Quickly, because you followed this so closely, was there any reversible error or something that seemed like an obvious point of appeal for you as they try to take this to the next level?
I don't think so. I think the judge was measured in his approach. He gave both sides their due. He allowed all the evidence in that was appropriate and reasonable, and the jury considered it all and determined that in our society, in their society, we will not allow predatory behavior of young women, regardless of our position, our power, our celebrity in society. and we're going to hold you responsible, and you're going to be accountable. And that's what they did. They resoundingly rebuked Bill Cosby's claims of innocence.
So the defamation case that you have been involved with was on hold pending this. Now, will that go back to active litigation?
It's going to go back to active litigation. My clients, my 7 clients, are anxious to have their day in court to tell their story, that they are not liars like Mr. Cosby branded them, and they're looking forward to having their good name and reputation restored and to see that justice is done.
Okay, we will watch for that. Jim, thank you for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
All right, it is the interview we've all been waiting for. Bret Baier and Jim Comey, the questions you wanted answered, including Comey's reaction to President Trump calling him a leaker and a criminal.
He's just wrong. Facts really do matter, which is why I'm on the show to answer your questions. That memo was unclassified then. It's still unclassified. It's in my book. The FBI cleared that book before it could be published. That's a false statement.
Bret Baier talks to us about the news-making interview, and NBC's Tom Brokaw is the latest big-name network anchor caught up in the Me Too movement. Details of the allegations against him coming up. President Trump calling his former FBI director, the one he fired, a leaker and a liar. James Comey got a chance to respond with chief political anchor Bret Baier. Spoke to Bret a short time ago about that wide-ranging interview today, beginning with what stood out to Bret amid the dozens of questions he fired off tonight.
I think what most struck me was the fact that he said, as of tonight, he still can't say that definitively the Steele dossier was funded by the DNC and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, we actually have a little bit of that. I want to play it because I think that caught everyone off guard.
When did you learn that the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign had funded Christopher Steele's work?
Yeah, I still don't know that for a fact. I knew it was funded first by Republicans, opposed to Donald.
But that's not true.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. That the dossier that Christopher Steele worked on was funded by Republicans?
Okay, my understanding was the activity was begun, that Steele was hired to look into, was first funded by Republicans, then picked up, the important thing was picked up by Democrats opposed to Donald Trump.
Okay, this dossier was used for all kinds of things, including, we understand, FISA applications, which ultimately led to FISA warrants. But until tonight, I didn't know he is still unaware of where the funding came from.
I don't understand how that's possible. If you are at the head of this investigation for weeks, you're relying, and now he says it was a smaller part than we are hearing on Capitol Hill on the FISA application that the dossier was, but you're relying on when you personally called unverified and salacious document, and you don't know who funded it, and you don't ask or find out. It doesn't seem to add up. His point eventually was that somebody opposed to Donald Trump funded it, whether it was never Trump, Republicans, or Democrats. But I think you would want to know when you're briefing the president-elect and President Obama on what this really means.
You also dug into him about Lisa Page and Strzok, the text back and forth, and about what they meant, what the insurance policy meant. He said he needed context for that. But you also said, shouldn't it call into question, potentially, what their work product was about, whether it was valid and unbiased? Here's what he told you about that.
So should their work product then be questioned?
Sure, it's a reasonable question to ask.
So
they were bad-mouthing everybody, including the candidate Trump.
So Peter Strzok interviews Hillary Clinton, deals with the bleach bit and the server and Cheryl Mills, all of that, interviews Michael Flynn, and is integral in this whole case.
But he's one of many other people involved in all the things you just ticked off. It's a reasonable question to ask, and I can tell you this. When I saw the text, I was deeply disappointed in them, but I never saw any bias, any reflection of any kind of animus towards anybody.
What do you make of that?
Well, he went on to say that he just couldn't read the context in those texts. We're actually getting more texts as of tonight to Capitol Hill in between these two FBI agents, and I think it's tough to look at them and not see the inherent animus towards President Trump. And what does that mean? You know, I asked another question that was actually tweeted in by a viewer about what was meant by the insurance policy when Strzok and Page were talking about that in Andrew McCabe's office. Comey said he didn't know at all. But it really does go to a bigger picture of what was happening behind the scenes in this investigation.
You also talked to him about Andrew McCabe. Now, the Inspector General found that his firing was appropriate, that he had lied 4 times at least with regard to leaking information to the media. There's been some back and forth on that because he says that he coordinated with former FBI Director Comey, that there was a discussion about this information going out. You know, you asked him about how he now feels about the relationship because when McCabe was fired, he very publicly supported him.
Yeah, he tweeted out that he stood tall for the agency and stood up against small people who were trying to tear the institution down. You know, after seeing the IG report that he lied 3 times under oath, I asked him, does he still stand tall? It was actually a question by Kimberly Strassel, who had a whole list of questions that we thought we'd get at least one of her tweets in. And it was a good one because he stood by McCabe, said that he had a stellar career, but that he, you know, did something wrong and should pay for that. And I said, should he be prosecuted? He said, that's not my job. It was his job when he was FBI director and decided not to move forward with prosecution on Hillary Clinton.
Anything you didn't get to ask him, because he was late, but you got a lot of time there. You were barreling through the questions and so many things that people have asked us why he hasn't been asked. Anything else you would have wanted to ask?
I had a long list of other possible follow-ups and questions. You know, his decision not to call for a special counsel in the Hillary Clinton case because he had so much question about Loretta Lynch, but he doesn't call for a special counsel, and he writes in his book that he thought that that would be brutally unfair because it would be a lie and America would interpret something from a special counsel. But yet, in the Trump case, he gets to a different place and he leaks the memo to spark a special counsel, even though he doesn't know as of tonight that the dossier is funded by the DNC.
And maybe a little tension between him and the former Attorney General Loretta Lynch. I sensed a little there in your questions as well. Fantastic interview. I think you got more information by leaps and bounds than we've heard up to this point. So great job.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Brett. And this is a Fox News alert. Kristen Fisher is checking out what we know now about the new text messages that Brett just mentioned there between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. Kristen, what are you finding out tonight?
Well, Shannon, these previously missing text messages were so controversial because they covered such a critical time in the FBI's Russia investigation. The firings of Michael Flynn and James Comey and the appointment of the special counsel, that all took place between December of 2016 and May of 2017. And now it appears that CNN has gotten its hands on some of those text messages that were just turned over to Congress, and they do include discussions of those very events. Here's one example. Former FBI Special Agent Peter Strzok says right after Comey's fired, quote, having a tough time processing tonight, Liz, feeling a profound sense of loss. Former FBI attorney Lisa Page responds, I feel that same loss. I want to see what the FBI could become under him. His vision of greatness for our strong but flawed organization, I'm angry and mourning. Now, some of the texts are raising more questions than answers, like this one from Strzok, again, right after Comey was fired. He says, quote, we need to open the case we've been waiting on now while Andy is acting. But it's unclear what case Strzok is referring to or why it needed to be opened while Andy, as in the recently fired Andrew McCabe, was still in charge. Well, tonight, McCabe, Strzok, and Page's old boss, James Comey, said he was deeply disappointed in the anti-Trump bias displayed in those texts.
If you knew back then, when you were in charge of the investigation, and you saw those texts between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the level of animus they had against President Trump, what would you have done?
I'd have removed both of them from any contact with significant investigations.
Now, Strzok and Page were later removed from the Russia investigation by the special counsel, but the president and his allies say it's too late. The damage has been done. Listen to what he said when asked about those text messages just this morning on Fox and Friends.
You look at the corruption at the top of the FBI, it's a disgrace. And our Justice Department, which I try and stay away from, but at some point I won't. Our Justice Department should be looking at that kind of stuff, not the nonsense of collusion with Russia. There is no collusion with me and Russia, and everyone knows it.
Now, the FBI blamed these missing texts on a technical issue with FBI-issued Samsung phones. The Justice Department's Inspector General had to use forensic tools to recover them, but even then, many of them are incomplete, they're redacted, or some are simply impossible to understand, Shannon.
Well, it just keeps trickling in. Kristen.
Keeps trickling in, and they're still hard to understand. So many questions.
Yeah, these often answer or leave more questions than answers. So thank you for digging through them tonight.
My pleasure.
All right, legally, let's talk about what's happening here on numerous fronts with, first, John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and Ron Hosko was an FBI Assistant Director. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you.
Sure. Thanks.
All right, Ron, I'll start with you because we've just been talking about these messages between the two FBI employees. Tonight, Comey said he was disappointed, but he didn't see bias there. What do you make of what we've seen so far from the texts?
Well, it did seem to me that there was bias there. They were biased against a lot of people, certainly against the president. I think the relevant question is, did their political leanings, their personal beliefs, impact the case? Is there evidence of that? I hope that the Inspector General is looking for that evidence. It ought to be considered in any sort of discipline that is being planned or will be meted out. Certainly no agent should be putting themselves in that position where your personal biases impact your investigative efforts. And so I think Jim Comey nodded at this. There is an appropriate investigation going on, and discipline ought to be following.
Let's also talk about the fact that tonight he talked extensively with Brett about the various memos that he created after conversations with the president and other situations that he wanted to note. He shared them with a friend that we later learned did have some kind of working relationship with the FBI prior to him sharing the memos, but that friend then shared them with the media, or at least the contents of them. It's a very careful path here, but when Brett pressed him tonight about whether or not he had leaked, he said that's not the way he would describe it. This wasn't classified information. Here is what House Oversight Committee Chair Trey Gowdy had to say about Comey's description of what he did.
The other thing I will tell you, Tucker, that I learned tonight is Jim Comey has a definition of the word leak that no one else has. Yeah. What he says is a leak is what the rest of us call a felony. Leaking is disclosing a confidential conversation, which is exactly what he did.
John, what do you make of this now? Because we know the Inspector General is looking into the use of those memos and how they were handled.
Well, I think, fortunately, Mr. Comey ought to be investigated. I think that we're seeing here is Mr. Comey thinks he lives by one set of rules, and those rules are not the same that apply to the rest of us as Americans or even apply to the other agents in the FBI. He did leak information. The only question is whether the information he leaked was classified, but it's already privileged. He's leaking confidential conversations between the FBI director and the president to the media without the president's permission. I think this has done great damage to the FBI, both internally and externally. What president in the future is ever going to trust another FBI director that he can discuss confidential matters with him? What FBI agents are going to trust their leadership to understand that they live by the same rules they hold their agents to, and they hold the rest of us in the public who may ever be interviewed by the FBI to?
I want to ask you both very quickly to weigh in on the Hillary Clinton investigation, because we're waiting on the IG report. Quickly from both of you, Ron, I'll start with you. What are you going to be looking for?
You know, I am looking for more detail. I think that Brett did a great job tonight in starting off his Q&A with Jim Comey, asking about how the Hillary Clinton investigation was conducted, asking details about why the grand jury. We know there were a number of grants of immunity. Those are, by the way, not granted by Jim Comey or the FBI. That involves a prosecutor from DOJ. But I think we need to see more detail, and I hope it is exposed to the light of day.
Quickly, John, your comments as well.
I think whatever the IG report shows, I don't think you can get away from the public fact that Mr. Comey violated Justice Department and FBI guidelines several times by discussing publicly that he was not going to prosecute when it wasn't his job, then disclosing he was reopening it and then closing it again. That's the last thing you should be doing in an election year, is naming the targets of investigations when you drop them in the end.
It's tricky. All right, John and Ron, we'll wait for that report as you will. Thank you both for your time.
Sure. Thanks.
Well, another big-name television anchor accused of sexual misconduct. This time it is NBC's Tom Brokaw, accused by a former colleague, and she is not the only one. Howie Kurtz joins us live with that story. And an update on baby Alfie, the infant who's fighting for her life as a veteran journalist from NBC, CBS, and this network is accusing former NBC nightly news anchor Tom Brokaw of sexual harassment. Another woman's also speaking out against Brokaw on the condition of anonymity, making similar claims. Fox News Media Buzz host Howie Kurtz joins us with this breaking story. More bad news for NBC on this front.
NBC's had a tough year on this front because of Matt Lauer. Linda Vester has nothing to gain from telling this story. She's not suing. She's not seeking a job. She spoke to Variety, and she is a former war correspondent as well as reporter for NBC, and she described in pretty gripping detail what she says happened back in the 1990s, a couple of separate instances with Tom Brokaw. Let's take a look.
I was terrified. I jammed myself up against the back of the sofa. I grabbed the throw pillow, and I'm like this to show, with all the body language I can muster, that I'm terrified. I don't want him here. I'm not interested. Reached behind my head and tried to force me to kiss him. I pulled back with all the strength I could muster and stood up. And I said, Tom, I do not want to do this with you. I stood there for a couple of minutes and just shook out of sheer panic. And then I called my colleague in Washington and said, I'm safe.
She did share this contemporaneously with people at the time, as she mentioned the friend, the coworker she trusted.
Yeah, and Variety spoke to two people who she spoke to at the time. Also, this video, which goes on for a while, she says that she felt trapped in these instances, two different instances, one in Denver, one in London, by Brokaw. This man could destroy my career, she says. She said she was shaking at the time, deeply traumatized for years, according to her account. And the Washington Post is reporting similar allegations from a second woman who is unnamed.
Okay, this is what Brokaw says. I think this statement comes through NBC saying, I met with Linda Vester on 2 occasions, both at her request 23 years ago because she wanted advice with respect to her career at NBC. The meetings were brief, cordial, and appropriate, and despite Linda's allegations, I made no romantic overtures towards her at that time or any other.
You know, NBC has no further comment, but I've covered most of Brokaw's career at NBC. Very nice man. I mean, I never heard a whisper or rumor about this sort of thing. He's married to the same woman, Meredith, for more than 50 years. But if Linda Vester's account is to be believed, it shows you how some of these things could have happened, allegedly, intimidating younger women. They were often younger women. And nobody would ever find out. And isn't it striking, Shannon, that it happens on the day that Bill Cosby, icon of a different sort, convicted in the retrial of sexual assault. Of course, he was accused by more than 60 women. And after going through the Matt Lauer situation, who was accused of far worse, of actually having sexual relations with a number of women at NBC, this never got through past forcible attempted kissing. NBC, it seems, has a problem with its culture. This has also happened at other news organizations, including Fox. But the question now is, what is NBC going to do about it? Will any other women make these accusations of Vance Brokaw? Will he speak out rather than just issuing a statement?
Yeah, well, being in this business and knowing plenty of other women in this business, I have heard other similar allegations against Brokaw, so it will be interesting to see what comes of this. And as Linda Vester and her attorney said, as you mentioned, she doesn't want anything from this. She's not suing anybody. She said her primary purpose here is she wants other women to be brave enough to speak about their own experiences, whatever they are.
NBC is conducting an inquiry into what happened in the past, and this may have led, at least indirectly, to the allegations against Brokaw. How did the Lauer situation go on for 2 decades? Were there others? And so it's an uncomfortable period for the network, and I think the network is going to have to address this more forthrightly.
And as you mentioned, it's never fun when your employer is going through this, and you are in the middle of that story. So we know it's tough, and all the networks are trying to take.
NBC moved very swiftly against Lauer, but Tom Brokaw was an icon, what is the face of NBC News for 25 years, so tough situation for the network.
Everybody's taking a good internal look at the way they do things and maybe making changes, as I know we have here. Howie, thanks for coming in late.
Great to see you.
All right, citizens protest, and the hospital is defiant as the fight for baby Alfie's life continues. We've got an update. More fallout from the Parkland shooting also. This time it's the Broward County Sheriff being scrutinized. Trace Gallagher has that story. Now, following the mass shooting at a Parkland, Florida high school in February, the response of the Broward County Sheriff's Office and the response of the sheriff there, Scott Israel, to criticism leveled against him, both of those were called into question. Well, today, a vote on Israel by a Broward County Deputies Union was overwhelming. Trace Gallagher has the results and more. Trace.
Hi, Shannon. Overall, 628 South Florida deputies voted, and 534 of them voted no confidence in Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. The vote is largely symbolic and requires no action be taken. Still, it is a huge rebuke for the sheriff, and the union hopes it might prompt Florida Governor Rick Scott to replace Israel. Here's a union spokesperson. Watch.
We ask you to start changing your policies that are absolutely failing. We ask you to change your leadership to actually make it somewhat resembling amazing.
Sheriff Israel responded saying he is only accountable to the citizens of Broward County, quoting, "I will not be distracted from my duties by this inconsequential IUPA union vote, which was designed to extort a 6.5% pay raise from this agency." The union says this has nothing to do with contract talks, saying a big part of the no confidence vote stems from Sheriff Israel placing full blame on school resource deputy Scott Peterson. Remember, during the attack on Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, surveillance video and dispatch audio showed that Peterson stayed outside the school despite knowing the shooter's location. Sheriff Israel said the deputy's actions left him devastated. Watch.
So what should he have done?
Went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer. I think he remained outside for upwards of 4 minutes. Devastated, sick to my stomach. There are no words.
Deputies believe Sheriff Israel should have waited for the investigation to be completed before weighing in, especially considering there are now reports that during the Parkland shooting, other Broward County Sheriff's deputies took cover behind cars and trees, even though they too knew where the shooter was inside the building. Coral Springs police say they saw deputies taking shelter while they rushed past them to get inside the school. And for the record, Governor Scott is also, quote, disgusted the school resource deputy did not rush into the building. Shannon.
All right, Trace, thank you very much. Protesters are lined up and the fight for baby Alfie's life goes on. An update on that next as we're learning more about why the UK may be blocking his parents from taking a British toddler now fighting for his life inside a British hospital that refuses to feed him because he's suffering from an undiagnosed neurological degenerative disorder, while also refusing to let his parents take him elsewhere for treatment. Our next guest says the story is about the power of the state over the individual. James Freeman is with Wall Street Journal editorial board. James, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to be here.
What do you make of this case and what we're seeing play out?
Yeah, I think it's chilling. A lot of Americans just kind of tuning into it, I think. Obviously, you've been covering this a lot. I should probably be interviewing you on this topic. But I think it's surprising because we normally think of these horrible situations as what happens when a government-run health system runs out of money and they start basically going to the death panel nightmare scenario. But this really isn't about the money. It's just purely about power. The British medical system, legal system says it's not up to parents. It's up to hospitals to decide when a situation is hopeless and it's time to give up care.
Yeah, and we know that there has been, we're told, air ambulance or air transport standing by. Italy has granted citizenship. There are other hospitals and doctors who say they'll give this a try at least, and yet the UK, this hospital has numerous times, and the parents are praising the hospital for doing the best they can with this difficult situation now. But the hospital has gone to court numerous times to be able to make decisions about withdrawing food now from this little boy. And a lot of people are asking questions about why they won't just let him go. An interesting piece on hotair.com says what I think a lot of people are wondering. It says the only conceivable reason the UK would refuse to let him go is because they're terrified that he really might be successfully treated. If they're wrong on a question of life and death that's now being scrutinized internationally, no one would ever trust an NHS end-of-life assessment again. Letting him go would require the British healthcare and judicial systems to do the one thing bureaucracies bristle at doing. Knowing how it undermines their institutional authority, they'd have to admit they were wrong. They can't do it. To preserve the public's trust, the child must starve. It's pretty harsh, James.
Yeah, and it's awful. I would say it's deserved. As you mentioned, the doctors at the British hospital have not been able to diagnose his problem. They're saying he's certainly doomed, but they don't understand what's happened to him. And as you've pointed out on your previous shows, I believe Monday, when they turned off his ventilator, the expectation was he would die. In fact, back in February, the hospital told the court that it would be just a handful of breaths. He would basically pass away within moments, couldn't live without the ventilator. As you know, call it a miracle, call it confusion on the part of these doctors who are asserting their authority. He survived. Here we are Thursday night. Now, they did allow him the ventilator and water again after it was clear that into Tuesday he was surviving on his own. despite their prediction that he would die on Monday.
Well, and the authorities have been upset because a lot of people have shown up at the hospital saying they were going to storm it. Some say they've been there peacefully, but they've certainly been out in force. The police, they're tweeting, "We've issued a statement this evening to make people aware that social media posts, which are being posted in relation to Alder Hey and the Alfie Evans situation, are being monitored and may be acted upon." Then they link to the full statement. Mark Hemingway retweeted that, adding, quote, "Not only are we going to kill this child, we're going to throw you in jail for complaining about it." I mean, this has got a lot of people very upset.
Yeah, it would be one thing for the police to warn against threats of violence, but to just say as a blanket statement they're monitoring people's messages on social media and will act upon them. What does that mean? Along with having rights for the parents to decide how their child will be treated, also people don't have the right to comment. It's really, really chilling, and I hope it's not a preview of the United States. I think if you want to take some comfort, we see hundreds of thousands of people across Britain saying this is not the system we want. We want the parents to have rights, the patients to have rights, and the Polish government, as well as the Italian government, wanting to help.
Yeah. James Freeman, you wrote an excellent piece on this. I hope people will check it out because you talk about issues in the United States. Although people say that's fear-mongering, you have specific cases. We'll tweet it out so people can read it. James, thank you very much.
Thanks, Shana.
And thank you at home for joining us tonight. Most watched, most trusted, and most grateful you